All right. So welcome everyone to the Impact Lab series, episode 3. I'm your host, Tukina, and I'm really glad you're tuning in with us today. This episode is one that I've personally been looking forward to because we're diving into a question that I've personally wrestled with, and I know so many other sustainability professionals have, and that question is, how do you actually get buy-in from leadership? In other words, how can sustainability teams move from being the reporting people to being the strategic advisors at the table? I'm joined by an incredible guest who knows exactly what it takes to bridge that gap. Please welcome Jasper, the founder of Business Impact. With a career that's influenced over 10,000 business leaders, Jasper is known for challenging the way organizations think about sustainability. He's one of the longest-standing consultants in the Nordics on the topic of circular economy and the best-selling author of Making Sustainability Profitable. Hi, Jasper. How are you doing?
Hello, Zugina. Thank you so much. And what a welcome. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, happy to have you. So let's kick things off by framing something that we hear all the time, and that's just happens to personally grind my gears. And that's, in order to make an impact in sustainability, you need to basically become an entrepreneur. And my personal opinion on that is some of the most influential sustainability work happens from within companies, not outside of them. I know you've worked with thousands of business leaders. Do you think the glorification of entrepreneurship sometimes overshadows the role of entrepreneurs in this particular context of sustainability?
Well, it's an interesting starting point. So I like that. If you want big impact, you need to solve big existing business problems. It's actually that simple. The problem is that most of the sort of impact-driven persons focus too little on the business value of what they do and too much on saving the world, so to speak. The problem is that decisions are made and funding is allocated according to the perceived importance of the problem that they solve. And this is judged from the decision maker's point of view, not from what does the world really need. And hence, current existing business problems, they just trump massively long-term problems that are also, significantly bigger. And that will include themselves and also everybody they care about. But that's, the bias we have towards what's valuable now versus further down the road. Really, before we decide whether or not the problem is if you're an, entrepreneur or if you're inside a company or if you start something on your own, it really boils down to this problem around not being, if you want impact, you got to tie it to business problems. So the solution to this really is, and find out, I typically say, what's the 3 to 5 biggest problems that your company is facing, and what's the 3 to 5 biggest problems that your ideal clients are facing, and then try to figure out what happens if I view those through this ESG lens or circular economy or climate or whatever is sort of the label in your organization, and then see, what kind of solutions do I see here that we don't normally see. So that's really the basics around the impact side. And the second part of your question, whether or not we need to start a company or we could do it from internally, to me, I think it's best to view that like two different games played at different arenas with different rules, right? So it's like comparing badminton and tennis and asking which sport is best. It really depends on what you like. And if you go to different regions of the world, there'll be a massive yes for one of them, and others it's a bit more comparable. So they're different games, right? And if you play within the corporate world, you have more power behind you once you get the machine rolling, probably deeper pockets, more opportunities to impact because everything is there already. So the problem there and the big challenge is changing what's going on. But once you get that going, you can have massive impact. But also you can struggle a lot, and that's what we're probably going to talk a bit more about on how to actually make that happen. Whereas if you have the more sort of agile startup, well, the strength here is you have very short distance from idea to action. But as a starting point, you also have very little impact because you are, a nobody with a non-existing company. So you have all the struggle that you have of getting a company off the ground, right? So the whole entrepreneurial journey. So they are two very different games played by different rules and different people, attracting different types of people. So I don't think there is a right or wrong way, but there is definitely massive room for creating results in both arenas. But they are two different sports.
Yeah, actually, I agree with you. I think we've talked about this before. I call this the Trojan horse theory, that being embedded within an organization already gives you the ability to leverage the influence from within, either by shaping the strategy. You've mentioned problems that the company is facing. And at the same time, if you intentionally upskill in key areas like financial literacy or storytelling or stakeholder engagement, you can also happen to fast track your career in the meantime. And it could be potentially a win-win. And we'll touch a bit more on how these skills compound over time, making sustainability professionals indispensable in leadership roles. But that's for later. So we'll touch on more on that later. Yeah, but I want to go back to a point that you've mentioned, is that we're not starting off a clean slate. We need to convert the current systems as they are, and that requires an understanding of those systems.
Yes, very much so.
Just to ground this a little bit, can you think of any maybe real world examples of what a sustainability intrapreneur, would potentially do to drive change from within?
Well, I think we're probably going to come back to this several times, but again, the magic, if there ever is a magic bullet here in this game, it is really this part about connecting to business value, to business problems, right? So when I see people that succeed, and it actually doesn't matter if it's inside in the corporate world or as a startup, it means that they have been good at understanding what's the main problems we're facing right now. So basically put the customer at the center, right? And that's either the customer of the company or your customer as a ESG professional, which means management, senior management at some point. But if you view those as customers and force yourself to have a customer-centric thinking, right? I want to understand what your main problem is right now. What are you struggling with? What keeps you up at night? What happens if I call you at 4 a.m. in the morning and hang up the phone? What will be buzzing in your head because now you're awake? That's the most important problems they're facing right now. And then figure out, train yourself to see, how can I be part of that, right? The thing is that most business leaders, they view their company through a lens of the flow of time and the flow of money. So it's our hours and the money, obviously. But especially if you're in the manufacturing, or even if you're in a service-based company that has lots of materials connected to doing it, there's actually a bigger chunk of money that is tied to the resources.
Absolutely.
And so if you take it, I know the numbers from Denmark, where I sit, more than 50% of all costs in an average manufacturing company in Denmark is tied to materials and components. And on top of that comes energy and water, so it's even more. And below 25% is tied to salary. But still, there's so much focus on the salary side and the hours, right? And so little on the material flow. So when you bring in that material flow perspective on your business, you can bring in a perspective that most senior leaders don't have because they've never been taught. So that's where you can come with the different suggestions to solving the problems, but it has to start with you understanding what the problem is and then trying to come up with solutions with that different angle, that different perspective. That's the only way you will ever become a high priority. Unless you are fortunate enough, let me end there, to be in a company where one of the top 5 problems really is a sustainability problem, in traditional sense, meaning that if you just solve that in your traditional way, you will inherently be valuable to them. But in most cases, that's not the situation, right? It's way further down the priority list.
Definitely, yeah. And that happens to be true also in the GCC, where the maturity level of sustainability is not where you would like it to be. But I absolutely love that. And correct me if I'm wrong, my takeaway is that impact is not necessarily about your job title. It's essentially about your leverage point. So be it strategy or resources you mentioned, be it water, energy, or human labor, there's always a seat at the table for sustainability if you're able to connect it with business value. That's essentially the takeaway.
Exactly, right? But the problem is the ticket to get access to that table, as you say, is not to speak about it in the way that you prefer, but in the way that they prefer.
That's a perfect transition to my next question, actually, is how do you actually get that buy-in? And for many mid-level roles, especially in sustainability, there's often this gap between doing the work and being heard at the right level. I would love to hear your take on something that comes up a lot in this space, and how do you actually get people to listen? And what are some proven ways that sustainability professionals can start building internal credibility, even without the formal title or the budget to go with it?
Yes. The starting point is actually a different place. So if you don't mind, I'll just sidetrack for a second. Because this is the global narrative. And you just stop me if you think I'm completely off, right? Sustainability, ESG, climate, whatever, right? It's a problem. It's a burden. It's costly. It's hard to connect to business. We have to compromise, lower quality, or don't stop doing things. And at the end of the day, it then becomes a discussion about who needs to pay, right?
Right.
You recognize this picture?
Whose pocket is it coming out of? Yeah.
Right?
Definitely.
So when that's the case, then the second you enter the room with your ESG title and start talking ESG, what you do is you trigger everybody listening to this feeling that, okay, here comes this burden, problem, costly, lower quality, compromise, hard to business type of speech. So everything is already instantly at guard. Right? This is not good. This is more costs. So the key thing here, if you want any sort of access to the table, access to discussion, increase your standing in the organization, everything, all that, you need to translate. It's page 2 in any book about communication and marketing. What does it say? I don't know. Have you ever read a marketing book or a communications book? It says something along the lines of, if you want to communicate anything effectively, you have to make sure that you connect with the receiver. You've got to start where they are and make it understandable for them. It's never the receiver's problem if communication fails, when the message doesn't come across. It's you as the sender. Right? It's the work of the sender to make sure that that the person I communicate to understands what I'm saying and that it makes sense if I want to be heard, right? That's how it's defined. And yet, what we see is that I would dare say more than 95% of all communication and marketing around sustainability talks about sustainability without doing the translation that, well, this is actually going to mean less cost or increased happiness of the people that are working there, leading to more productivity, to less sick leave, more people staying longer, you can attract better talent, you can get new branding opportunities, you can reduce your risk for compliance issues, you can blah, 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 blah. Nobody ever, it's wrong to say nobody, the vast majority do not translate, but leave it up to the receiver to be able to make that cause and effect analysis, which A, they can, and B, they freaking won't. Sorry, they won't. Why should they? Why should they spend all that energy on it? It's your problem. So the sender, as long as you keep talking ESG in traditional terms, if you have an organization with that doesn't have that high level of maturity on this, so they all get it, which most, as you said in the beginning, most don't have. As long as you do that, you keep putting yourself up in the corner. Like you are that person talking about this problem that is costly and hard for us to do and that we don't really like because it means we have to compromise and so it really starts with understanding this basic connection to value and then reframing the way you speak about this. Because the way we speak about it actually makes the problem bigger.
I agree. We're doing a disfavor by just assuming that, it's the right thing to do. And I think this is what you mentioned, where strategic framing comes in, and possibly also storytelling. I think storytelling can be quite powerful. And yeah, I'm totally with you.
And actually, it's even worse, right? Because, let's go back a few thousand years. Doesn't matter, right? 1,000 years, which in evolutionary terms is yesterday, right? So basically nothing has happened to our brain over the last 1,000 years that is sort of, right, it's yesterday. If somebody is about to take something away from them, food, clothing, cheap, whatever, something, what do? Well, they'll hold on to it for dear life because it means I'll go hungry to bed or my kids will starve or they will die or whatever, right? Since this was yesterday in our brain, we react the same way, right? So whenever we have to give up something, the reptile brain, who's running the show, says, no, thank you, right? Warning, this is dangerous. Whenever we talk about having to reduce, avoid, let go, stop doing, or even just the notion of it back to that global narrative that I talked about just before, means that our brain instantly thinks everything for sustainability means I have to compromise and let go, which means danger, I might starve to death or my children will die. Super, super overreaction, but it's just like we know with if you're stressed and an email come and it reacts like, is the tiger coming, right, almost killing you. So you get that same response, right? So we have this super, super fast, but also slightly simplistic reptile brain that's running the show, and it basically filters everything that comes in, and it either says, well, good, because this makes me more likely to succeed, meaning survive and thrive and reproduce myself, or the opposite. No, this is challenging me, and it will make it harder for me to reproduce and to survive and thrive. And then everything in between that is just like, well, whatever, I don't care, right? And whenever we talk about the way most talk about sustainability, we kickstart this filter, saying to the more reflective part of the brain, no, don't do it, it's dangerous.
That's quite an interesting connection there. Yeah, I would not have thought to go there, but I think that makes it, for anybody that cares about sustainability, it also makes it a duty to frame it in a way that people can be receptive to, as opposed to, well, it's just, we should get it, it's the right thing to do, because that's just not, ideally that's how it should be, but we just have to work with it.
It will make your life a lot easier when you train yourself to that shift in mindset and vocabulary, and we can dive into it if you like, but that's, that, and then connecting it to business. Those are the two main keys to succeed, both in terms of creating more impact, to have that more higher standing in the organization that you mentioned about, career, pathway, impact, all of it.
Yeah, I would love to dive in deeper into that. Can you think of any actionable steps as to how you can make that shift?
Yeah, the thing is, and you mentioned the book in the beginning. In there is a chapter 3 on it, on mindset. And the thing is that I distilled 5 key issues. I call them the fatal 5. And then correspondingly, what are the 5 to thrive? That's the transformation that we need to make, the mental transformation, the paradigm shift, you could call it as well, if you like. And really, the trick is to get that part, make that transformation of yourself. And you know what? I'll be happy to even gift a copy of the book for your listeners, if you like, because then they can just download it and read for themselves. It's a 20-minute read or something, and then start practicing it, because that's really going to make the difference, right? So if you like, we can flip through those 5, and then you can always, depending on, you can ask more or less questions to it if you want to expand it, can flip through them. Would that be good?
Definitely, yes. That'd be terrific.
All right. So the first one is one we already talked about, so we can do that pretty quickly. It's the one about, most start and end with sustainability. I think this is about sustainability, communicated this way, and all of that we've just been talking about, where you have to change that into the start and end with business, right? So this is where, again, what are the key problems we have? It's that customer-centric approach, and then finding ways to solve that. So start and end with business, right? Rather than making your, say, carbon footprint and start from the top of the biggest impact, right? Then go through the impacts and find out where is somewhere that I can connect to one of those, my customers' problems, right? And then start there. So that's the first one. The second one is something we also touched a bit about. This is this part that, this whole area is marinated in guilt, right? So this is the stop, avoid, minimize, don't do, and all of that story, negativity all the way. And this is that triggers that scarcity part of our brain. So super, super critical to understand and shift that into, so it's a reframing part, right? It's about creating new and better solutions rather than minimizing. It's not about being less bad. It's about being more good, you could say. So it's that shift in mindset and with a framing. And you can take the exact same steps. So say you say, okay, then we want to have a whatever product you do produce. We want to make a new version of this that has 10% less, a lower carbon footprint, or 50% or whatever. And you can reframe that to saying, well, we want to develop a new and better version that is 50% more energy efficient. It's the exact same task, but the brain will stumble on one of them saying, this is reduce, avoid, stop, I don't like it, and there's no energy in it, it's hard, and in terms of language, it doesn't resonate with the business people's language, right? Whereas the other one, we're about to create a new and better version. That's what they get up to do every day in the morning, right? So there's this alignment of language and understanding and avoiding that scarcity part of our brain. That's the core of the second one. The third one is that green products cost more. That's almost a universal law. People experience it all the time. But there are so many places where you can save money or make money in terms of looking at your product and your business through the lens of sustainability.
Anything regarding efficiency, would it be renewable energy or logistics, for example? If you're just optimizing the route for logistics, that's money saved. Optimizing packaging, that's also translates to efficiency and money saved. Yeah, but there's endless examples of what that might look like.
Exactly, right? And even though there is all these examples, it's still the default that it costs more. And that's when the starting point is that this new iteration of our product or our service is green, it's going to cost more, then I can guarantee you're going to be right. It's a hard work to innovate, to find that new and better version. And if you allow yourself that it's absolutely okay, that it's just a little bit more costly, well, then you will stop there. So this is about how high do you dare to raise the bar, right? So this is really, really a mindset part, right? Because there's so many ways. And I've even I remember there was a session I had with a group of business leaders, and we were talking about this point, and then she said, actually, our sort of sustainable version of the product here, our product line here, is actually far more profitable. But we still, it's cheaper for us to manufacture it, but we still sell it with a premium because we can. Everybody expects the green version to be more expensive, so that's what we do. But it's kind of like, perhaps I need to go back and think if this is smart. Am I just, keeping alive a story that actually also makes it harder for us in other areas, right? So there are many examples of how you save a lot of money because you innovate to smarter solutions, right? So, but anyway, so that's the third of them. The fourth one is this notion and focus on projects, right? Compared to understanding that this is a way of doing. And as we've already been talking about several times, the more you connect it into business and to solving problems, this is not a project here and there. It's a way of doing, and you need to understand that. And the more you dive into it, working with it in this way, the more evident it becomes that this is actually a way of thinking about business, about developing and running a business that just offers some extra perspectives and a smarter grip, basically. And then as an additional bonus, it's also better for the world. So you need to have that shift as well. And then the fifth and final one is that most companies tend to have that it's fairly few people that are working with sustainability, and they're also reluctant to communicate too much about it. And you need to shift that into being open, transparent, and collaborative, because this is a team sport. It's not something you can do for yourself. But being open and transparent also gives you credibility when you start communicating about this. And then finally, you probably do you fly from time to time? Do you take a flight? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
Are you the type of person that buys tickets for fast tracks, or the type that stands in the line waiting?
So far I've just waited. I've never gotten a fast track before.
No,
Not sure where this question is going, where this lands me, but yeah.
No, but so I bet you've been standing there looking up at it, and the sign says something like 45 minutes, and you're queuing up, and this is getting tight to my flight departure, right? Whenever, if the closest you get to fast track in the business world in this area is if you are open and collaborative and communicating about where you are. Because whatever problem you are facing in your business, somebody somewhere have been there, right? We all tend to think, I have this unique problem. No, you don't. Somebody somewhere have dealt with it. But if you keep everything to yourself, you also insist on inventing all the solutions yourself. Whereas if you go out and say, hey, this is where I am, this is where I want to get to, right now I'm here and I'm struggling with this and this, can anybody help me? Then somebody can come and help you. I will come work for you. I can sell you the solutions, or we can partner, or we can, whatever it is, right? So it's like fast track or the long queue line. It's up to you what you like, right? So if you look at these five, you can see also, Yeah, and then you will see why is it that this is the winning formula, right? So you have two companies. Let's say they do the exact same product, competing at the exact same market for the same people. And one of them, well, they do work on sustainability, but it's clearly a project that they do here and there that results in slightly more costly products that are a bit less bad for the world somehow. And it's clear that these are standalone projects that are more or less tied together on a string, and it's hard to figure out really what they're doing because they're not too keen on communicating. And then you have the competitor. What they do is that they solve some of your biggest problems you are facing as a customer with this particular product in mind. They're solving that, offering you a better value to price ratio. It's clear that this is a way that they're doing, right? They're offering this to you consistently. It's not just a one-off here and there. And they're really, really clear about where they are, where they're going, and how far they got, and what you get out of this. Well, where do you want to shop? Where do you want to work? Where do you want to partner? Where do you want to invest?
Clearly, the most transparent.
So that's why, if you do sustainability the right way, it is a massive competitive advantage, simply because you create better solutions that have where your team rally more around you, and you get clients that are more thrilled by what you do because you use this to think up better solutions for them that is also a better match for their problems, and at the same time is also better for the world. So it also feels good, right? So that's what this is really all about. And that's why I say you need to understand that this is not a project. This is a way of doing and thinking. And that's, basically the sum of all of these five. They lead up to this is a type and a way of doing business and thinking about business and development and strategy and leadership and all of that. And it's superior, which is also why going forward, there will be less and less room for those who stand on the old way of doing, because it's super inefficient.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think it comes down to strategic framing, and you've mentioned the skill set or other mindset shift that I've personally seen time and time again, but it's nice to see it come together in this framework that you've come up with. So we'll have the book in the footnote, and you can always refer to chapter 3 to dive a bit deeper into that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, start there if you're in a hurry. Just start on chapter 3.
Okay. So now that we've pretty much covered how this change internally can be good for business, I want to touch a bit more on how it could be good for the individual and how this could serve as a differentiator for the ESG professional, be it having that promotion or climbing the ranks or whatever it is that you're seeking. I want to touch base on how we can reframe ESG as a potential career accelerator or a launch pad for broader leadership opportunities.
Yes, fire away. Where do we want to start?
Okay,
this is a fairly broad topic. So,
yeah. So have you had any examples where a sustainability-minded individual were able to advance their career, whether it's that fast-track promotion or even switching departments, not necessarily through their credentials, but by making ESG relevant to business performance?
Yeah, and I think there are sort of two different that came to mind when you said that. So one is sort of the ESG professional in some form that actually gets this and start by finding ways to solve business problems, right? For instance, I work with a company called Grundfos. It's the world's largest pump manufacturer, or second largest or something like that. So circulation pumps, hot water in your house, cold water in your house. That's, odds are it's their pump that are actually making sure when you turn on the tap, you get water out. So they had a guy there, Peter, that were in charge of their sustainability and circular economy effort. And he got this challenge of finding 1 million in savings, recurring savings at the factory there, their headquarters, in a year. And that was kind of the proof of concept. So by starting really pursuing that and not into all types of product development and everything that takes several years in this company, he just really narrowed in on waste as a resource, right? So that's one of the 5 disciplines that are in the within the circular economy. how do we utilize leftover material that we run around called waste into value somehow. By doing that, they end up actually hitting that goal, actually slightly more, and they double it the year after, and they double it again the year after. But it means that all of a sudden they are starting to move significant numbers of cash and finding models that could replicate that. They might have looked at it at just one of their products, but it's actually the same. They could replicate this across all the markets and all their products, more or less. So they're really starting to get some traction to the idea. And I recently, I was teaching, I teach at a mini MBA on this stuff, and there were one from this company. So I got a bit of an update, and it's still going. She said, but Peter's no longer at the company, but she has at a slightly lower level than he was the responsibility for making a lot of these optimization. And she says, this is 10 years in a row that I hit or surpass the target that I get. And I can't see that I won't do it again next year, because even though we've been doing this and this and this and this and this, there's just so much. Again, it's such a super inefficient way that we produce today, that there's so much to gain. So they just keep hitting those targets on saving costs. So it puts them up next side to, I guess you could call them lean consultants or other ways that are sort of optimizing processes, right? So there is some there that are sort of in the ESG space. And then I think the other one that came to mind when you asked was, I guess, more technical staff that perhaps come at this more as for inefficiencies, that without really focusing too much on, let's save the world, more have this as a technical challenge or personal pride, or it just doesn't make sense. Why should we waste all this, right? We could be, so they're fascinated and good at, and it's part of their task, right, to make the machine work as efficient as possible. And quite often you will find some there that, without at all considering this part of an ESG agenda, simply makes process optimization, it's probably the language in their field, but they have massive impact. And they get really high standing in the organization because they just keep, you show up a Tuesday morning and it's like, hey, I have an idea, right? I found a way where we can make this so much faster or smarter or cheaper or whatever it is. And it's like, amazing, right? Yeah, absolutely. So they earn the trust simply by doing the work and, stopping some of those leaking holes or removing some of those inefficiencies, not to change the world, but simply to make the machine work smoother, because that's their joy, that's their skill set, that's what they focus on. But if you were to look at this from an ESG perspective, you could also say, well, you just had a massive impact on reducing our waste and thereby our both carbon footprint and material footprint and blah, 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 right? So again, that's the translation. There's never been into the ESG space, so they would never frame it like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, just to build a bit more on that, I have an example regarding this. I was part of a company that did this exact same thing, and they did not brand it as sustainability whatsoever. It was called Value Plus Measures, and it was directed towards process engineers that were able to optimize the piping, and whoever was able to optimize it the most won this prize. So there was also some rivalry between the engineers and the company. So we were able to capitalize on that a little bit, and we had immense carbon emissions saved. That it was later on my job to be able to translate that into carbon emissions to make it into the reporting of the company.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty much.
And it's a really great example, right? And if you take that and go back to what we talked about earlier, they don't make the mistake of speaking ESG language to senior management because they don't know ESG language, right? But they are actually speaking directly into something that they understand, right? So this is dollars and cents. I get it, right? Whereas people in the ESG space, they tend to have this tribal language that doesn't really work well. And if we don't take it upon us to learn the other language and to translate, well, it will be like you dumping down to some foreign place on the earth and insisting that your language is what works here. If nobody speaks it at all, you're still kind of like, or really, really poor at it, you come across pretty poorly, right?
Yeah.
You need to learn the language.
Goes against human nature.
Yeah.
You've mentioned two categories of, avatar ESG professionals. I want to maybe talk about a third one, which is someone that has absolutely no expertise in ESG other than non-technical. I have one example that comes to mind. I've spoke to a person that was a designer at a furniture company, but she was a self-thought sustainability enthusiast. So she was very interested in sustainability in general and made sure to learn about it. And when those questions started popping up within the company in meetings, she became the go-to person and somehow became indispensable to the company. And she even went so far as to convince them to use sustainability as the differentiator in the market. And that allowed her to move up the ranks pretty quickly. And she actually became part of the management at some point. And sustainability became the bridge to make her a strategic voice within the company. She eventually became the head of sustainability years after. And that was not due to a traditional background. She just understood how to connect ESG to business value, which is what you've touched on previously. So what do you think about self-thought or self-initiated learning? Do you think it carries any weight in formal corporate environments?
Absolutely, because doing leads to learning rather than learning leads to doing. So this is kind of like the entrepreneurial mindset versus the academic. And because we are in a space here where a lot of the steps we need to take, we're unsure of, it's not completely familiar territory. I mean, you might have some things are, let's install solar cells or whatever, but as soon as we start working on something where we're changing bits and pieces in our business and our product or our incentive structure or whatever it is, positioning, all of that, it's uncertain how the market will react, right? It's not like building a garage. We don't know exactly what it ends like. Yeah. In academia, since the first day of school, I don't know, how old are you when you start in school in your part of the world? It's like 5, 6, 7, something like that? Yeah, right? So basically, let's say it's from the age of 6. From the age of 6, you're told that you need to learn to be able to do. That's it, right? That's the whole basic assumption and narrative behind all schooling, is that you sit down and learn stuff to be able to go out and do stuff afterwards, which is smart if you can read in a book what you need to do. The problem is you can read some, but a lot of this is about far more trial and error, which is why the entrepreneurial mindset works really well. And it doesn't matter, again, if you're building your own or working inside, back to one of your opening questions. But that entrepreneurial mindset about, basically it's that build, measure, learn, feedback loop, small iterations, testing, doing, learning, right? That's what makes you capable of gaining new knowledge. So there's absolutely room for that, experience-based knowledge to grow rather than the traditional credentials that I have taken education X, Y, and Z. But you have to be able to, of course, again, tie it up to something meaningful. But the more you work on changing stuff in the business, the more you work on this, creating new and better versions, the more you will be at a space where it's doing that leads to learning, rather than learning that leads to doing.
Also, the space is particular in the sense that it's continuously changing. There's always a new regulation coming out. There's been quite a few updates recently with the omnibus and the CSRD and the CSDDD being on hold. It's highly political, so there's a lot of changes that
That's right. But of course, in terms of regulation, there are actually stuff where it's about, okay, I need to actually sit down and learn because here somebody defines the rules. Mm-hmm. So like it or not, there are a set of rules. So if you need to figure out how to sort of position yourself in those, of course, then you need to learn in order to be able to do meaningful. But, for me, compliance with legislation is the least interesting part of this game. Because if you come at it from a compliance with legal, then odds that you get a competitive edge is fairly low. Because legislation is not designed to create a competitive edge. It's designed to control how you handle different parts, whatever it is, right? So it's designed to set a standard for how we want things to be done, or what you can and cannot do. And of course, that can lead to innovation. It does sometimes, but it's not designed as a tool for business development and creativity and competitiveness. So obviously, if your approach to sustainability is let's make sure we're complying with the law, odds are that you are not going to get the competitive edge, right? Because most people comply with the law. So it's not, super fantastic. So you have to shift that one. So I spend very little time on the compliance part because for me, the far more interesting part is going back to what are the main problems you have. It's the customer-centric approach, right? What's your problems? What's your ideal client's problems? Let's solve those. That makes those new and better products. And of course, we've got to make sure we're compliant with legislation as well, but you tend to get way ahead of the game when you work this way anyway. And then, of course, when specific pieces of regulation come out, well, okay, you need to sit down or find somebody that can sit down and tell you, these are the things you need to cover. Okay, and then you cover that. But that's not where the value comes in. And that's not where the fun and drive and willingness to scale and implement at scale doesn't come from being compliant with law. That comes from being the competitors. That comes from making your customers super, super happy about your new version of your product.